I'm Frank Vaughn. It's August 5th, 2025. Thank you to everybody for all your feedback yesterday. I have not read through all the comments yet, but I look forward to doing that at some point today. I'm going to read every single one to figure out why you people donate your precious time to my content. We're going to begin today. We have a lot of serious subjects to cover. There's a bombshell in here about imputed value. I believe that's the term, but we'll get into it when we get there. But first, we got to start where we started yesterday with geese. After I was done filming yesterday, my memory was tickled by the content, and so I went searching and I found all of these articles, one from May 29th, just this year. Militant approach needed to control Canada goose population in border city, says expert. Windsor has obtained a federal permit to remove 150 Canada goose eggs, so you got to go to the federal government to ask permission to deal with cobra chickens. How can cities help control cobra chicken populations? Stop mowing their grass. Get rid of them. How much is too much goose poop in London city parks? National symbol or national pest? Abundant Canada geese populations a threat to ecosystems. Research finds. But you're still going to get fined $300 if you try to move a goose that is standing in your way and blocking your access to a residence. And the insight that I actually came to is not the absurdity between the contrast of hunting them for food, the fact that they're seen as a pest and a nuisance, but you're not allowed to touch them, you're not allowed to do anything unless you go to the federal government for permission. Not the municipal government, not the provincial government. You have to go to the highest government in the land to deal with a known nuisance problem. But just what I want to talk about is the lucrative nature of these types of actions. The government doesn't make money. The government extracts money. So their source of revenue is how much they can pull out of you. So these environmental laws, and we have recent news releases from Environment and Climate Change Canada, help paint a picture of the kinds of offenses that lead people being charged under the Act. Now, Environment and Climate Change Canada, they changed and they put that word climate change in there because, in my opinion, climate change is nothing but a great big money-making venture for government because it allows the government to regulate every single activity that creates carbon, which is pretty much everything because it's the building block of life. It's a great revenue generator for an extractive company, which is what government is, but also these environmental regulations. Last year in Quebec, for example, 2 people who destroyed bank swallow nests while working on a mound of earth, the implication is accidental, were ordered to pay $60,000 and $5,000 respectively. So you're in your yard, you're moving some earth around. If you're dumb enough, if you find out that you've disturbed some kind of natural habitat in the process and you're dumb enough to actually do the right thing, supposedly the right thing, and report on yourself, you can look forward to having an extractive fine leveled upon you. In 2019, an oil company in Alberta was ordered to pay $1.775 million after 30 dead great blue herons were found after being exposed to bitumen at a company facility. I'm not trying to say that oil companies shouldn't be careful, but I want to highlight, where does the $1.7 million go? Does it go to the birds? Does it go to the bird sanctuary? Does it do anything for the environment? It goes to general revenue, meaning that it disappears into that great big black hole known as government spending, where all the money they extract from the productive economy is not enough to fuel all of their pet projects. Canada running a $100 billion deficit today with really no crisis on the radar. There's been no official response. There's been no subsidies meted out yet officially. When it comes to the so-called tariff war, we're not in the middle of a C-19 quote-unquote crisis. We don't have all of these programs. We're still running a $100 billion deficit. That's where the fines go to. But this was a rabbit hole I went down yesterday. I don't pretend to know everything. I learn things every single day, and I learned something pretty critical, and I'm amazed it took me until I was 45 to learn this yesterday. Canadian GDP growth. Fictional rent fuels $1 in $10. It's more than oil. Fictional rent. I'm laughing because I came across this term, fictional rent, for the first time. I'd never heard it before. I'm like, what is fictional rent? And so I kept reading. Canada's economy posted a mild contraction, but the bigger issue is what's driving the remaining growth, quote unquote growth. StatsCan data shows real GDP fell by 0.1% in May, up from just 1.2% from last year. That's slow, but the biggest issue is how much of that came from imputed housing activity. Imputed rent from owner-occupied homes, a theoretical estimate, accounted for over 12% of annual GDP growth. So our GDP is contracting, and you're going to find out why. Quietly taking up more space in Canada's economy than many real industries. Canadian owner-occupied rents play an increasing role in GDP. The owner-occupied segment of GDP shows that imputed rent paid by homeowners. It's not rent that homeowners actually pay, but a statistical construct, the estimated value of rent they would pay if they rented their own home. These theoretical rents are taking up a growing share of the Canadian GDP. So if you're a homeowner, one of the 30-odd% of people in Canada who are not paying a mortgage, our GDP is calculated as though you're still paying rent. So GDP is supposed to represent economic activity. But what you find out actually is it's not just fictional rent. There's all kinds of things that are imputed. Hang on, I'm just going to bring up my list. Employer-provided benefits are estimated. Barter transactions are estimated as imputed value of non-market agricultural output. So if you grow a garden to subsidize your food bill, there's a government statistic department that is estimating the value of the food you consumed and throwing that into the GDP, what you produce yourself. Raise your own animals, but you're not commercially selling them. There's a statistician somewhere calling that part of GDP. Financial services imputation. Banks and financial institutions provide services, checking accounts, loan management, that don't always involve direct fees. So if you've got a free account that you're doing business with, or say you have one of those loan offers where you pay a 3% fee up front and you lock your loan for a set amount of time, there's a statistician somewhere calculating the interest or the expense that you would pay otherwise and putting that into the GDP. And of course, imputed rent for owner-occupied housing. Own account production of goods. So goods produced and consumed by households or businesses for their own use. Home repairs, software developed in-house are imputed at market equivalent values. So I hope you understand what I'm telling you here. This is insane. This was insane to me that our GDP, which in previous videos, I did my best effort and nobody debunked it. Nobody came up with better math. There was a couple, people said there was a couple issues with it that they were correct, but it didn't affect the overall outcome of the numbers, where I talked about, in addition to government accounting for 20 to 40% of our GDP. So government, as we just seen in the geese segment, is extractive through fines and taxation and everything else. It taxes the real economy of making things. That's calculated into our GDP. But then you also have to account for the drug trade and money laundering and all the illegal activity that's going on in Canada. And I put a double-digit percentage number on it as a lowball figure of how much of that activity is factored into our GDP. So you got government and criminal activity. And then on top of that, 8.5% right there of total real GDP is the owner-occupied housing component, which is imputed rent, which is what they call fictional rent. So it's not actual economic activity. And that is growing at 12%. That accounts for 12% of our GDP growth. Is this fake money? I want to swear. I want to swear with exasperation. Oil and gas extraction, for those who are curious, is about 3.3% of our GDP. So fictional rent is almost 3 times as high. Canadian GDP more reliant on fictional rents than oil and gas is the headline. This just quietly dropped in Better Dwelling, July 31st, 2025. My mind is blown. So when you hear Mark Carney say, when he's asked about why we don't have a budget or what Canada is going to do economically, and he says, I'm an economist, sit down and trust me, I got this figured out. Economists are the kind of people that come up with this. So A huge component of GDP is criminal. A huge component of GDP is extractive money that the government takes from the real economy. And almost $1.10 is money that's never even generated, and that's just from fictional rent. All the other types of fictions that I listed are also thrown in there. You need to understand that this is just another piece of evidence that the Canadian economy is a basket case. We don't produce anything except raw resources. Our manufacturing sector over the last decades, it used to be 30% of our GDP, is now under 10%. And we alone in the world, other than China maybe, are going to go to war with the United States, our largest trading partner, over tariffs, which we charge them in spades. And a lot of Canada is just elbows up retardation all day. And since we're on the subject of Canada, we got to talk about the headline here over at Zero Hedge. Hey, Canada, your failed wildfire management is poisoning America's skies. Now, Canada has a lot. Now, this isn't just Zero Hedge talking. This is actually, we're talking about toxic smoke. Despite the clear public health crisis, Canadian officials have shown alarming disregard. This is Representative James wrote in a press release. So this is an American government official highlighting how terrible our forest management practices actually are in terms of how it affects the United States. So here's what's going on now. We already had a massive series of fires in May, and rain luckily put them out, but they're all back on fire. Now, this is largely very difficult to control. Canada and the United States are not the same. So Representative James needs to calm down a little bit and understand that there's a road network built across the entire United States because a lot of federal forests are managed by the federal government. There's a collective effort to control and manage forests. Now, in California, the state has opposed that, and they've had a lot of wildfires because there's this call, very common in Canada, to not clean the forest floor. We don't do controlled burns in the name of carbon and the environment. We don't remove fuel. We deliberately leave the waste from logging in piles in the bush, getting nice and dry under the sun, where a stray lightning bolt or motivated humans, which are arson, is more responsible for forest fires than any other cause. You don't need climate change to explain it. You don't need that's the other thing. You don't need climate change to explain any of this. The government talks about climate change and forest fires. They don't talk about the relationship between poor forest management and arsonists and environmental activists and morons who light it all on fire. So we don't do controlled burns. We don't remove the fuel. Years of, and forests themselves, by the way, are trying to burn. Many of the trees that grow in the forest require fire, require burning in order for the seed to germinate. All you got to do is you just go for a drive up a side road if you're lucky enough, and you see a 60 or 70-year-old pine forest, and you'll notice that the entire lower course of the trees is dry timber. And in the summertime, the underbrush is perfectly dry. It's just prime for fire because it wants to burn. So if you don't want it to burn, you either have to control burn it, which is what the natives used to do. We're all about natives. We're all about treaty stipulations and announcements and all the. We can't even have a hockey game anymore without being reminded about Turtle Island. But we don't want to do their land management practices. They seem to understand this better than our government does now. Or you have to remove the fuel. You have to do the job. So the federal government and government practices in general, because I don't want to absolve the provinces of this, have engaged in environmental policy which creates the circumstances for massive uncontrolled wildfires to occur on a regular basis until that fuel is burned up. And they do it in the name of environmentalism. And then when you have these fires, they claim that this is the reason we need more climate change regulations on CO2. And CO2 has nothing at all to do with the deliberate conditions that are created by government to allow these fires to happen. And now it's international scandal. There's people all over the world breathing our smoke. Now, we're never going to be, not anytime soon anyway, we're never going to have the kind of control over our bush that the Americans have. There's no infrastructure. There's just no infrastructure. And I've said this before in my videos that once a wildfire up north is out of control, there isn't enough personnel on the continent to actually get it under control. That's why you do prevention. And Canada's gotten out of the prevention business. You would think that the burning of Jasper would have woke some people up at the federal level, but it didn't. It didn't wake anybody up in the media. And now all they do is they try to smear Danielle Smith as being responsible for that, and they fight over the political blame and talk about climate change, but no one's changing the underlying policy that creates these conditions. Anyway, the Americans have noticed. Now, I debated whether I was going to put this in this video or I was going to wait until tomorrow and do this segment tomorrow. But I'm going to do it now because there's time left. Canadian World Bank employee jailed in sickening child porn probe. Look at this guy. A Canadian employee of the World Bank in Washington has been sent to a U.S. prison for 4 years after he was busted distributing twisted child porn involving babies. He got 4 years in prison. See, the thing is, possession of this stuff indicates just how sick an individual you are. But underlying it all, because I see this stuff written up in the media all the time, the light sentencing. These people should be in jail for life, or they should be castrated, or they should be executed. That's always been my position. If you do this to a child, this is one of the clearest cases for capital punishment being brought back. Or forced castration, so you can never do it again. Make you a eunuch. Just destroy your ability to do it again. That would be sufficient. And there are libertarians say it's too far. You can't give government that kind of power. Bullshit. That kind of power, if there's ever a reason for it to exist, it's to deal with people like this. But anyway, 4 years in jail. Pleaded guilty in October in the District of Columbia. He got caught up in a sting operation. He was a financial risk assessor at the World Bank. And you'll see this, if you follow this rabbit hole, you're going to find out that these big financial institutions and financial institutions in general will come up over and over again. The vile videos depicted adult males raping a toddler and prepubescent boys. So we're talking about pederasts, violence. And this guy's watching this. Like, why 4 years? Why even allow this person to come back out in public? He had faced up to 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And yet he only got 4 years. And upon his completion, he's coming back to Canada because he comes from Saskatchewan. Originally from Outlook, Saskatchewan, Balak had previously worked for the Bank of Canada. Isn't this incredible? Now, we have to remember from previous videos that I've done in this session this week, whatever day we're on, because weekends don't really matter, that Emmanuel Macron decided to display prominently in his presidential portrait 3 books, one of which was written by a pederast, and it's about his adventures raping Muslim boys in North Africa. A self-described pederast, proud of it even, defending it. One of the books that Macron displayed. So this is an article that came out of the New York Times. A look inside Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan lairs. If this itself isn't disturbing art, I want to talk about how there's only one thing I really want to focus on. These pictures, for one thing. Okay. So these are pictures that Epstein displayed with all kinds of prominent people, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Bill Clinton. But there's some surprises in here for those of us who are paying attention. There's a picture. That looks a lot like Steve Bannon, doesn't it? I mean, it's the signature coat, the signature stance. I can't actually make out the face, but the hair. That looks like Steve Bannon, displayed in Jeffrey Epstein's office. But with all the cameras, so this is the other thing. Camera in the top corner up there. We got a camera in the top corner up here, so we have all of this video footage. And remember that Steve Bannon interviewed Epstein. There's all these videos, like 14 hours of footage that hasn't been released. Why isn't Bannon releasing that footage? Back to the article in the Times. In the office, in Mr. Epstein's office, which featured a photo of him with Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. This guy's the hub. And the spokes radiate all over the world. In the office, according to photos reviewed by the Times, Mr. Epstein showcased a green first edition of Lolita, the 1955 novel in which an intellectual develops a sexual obsession with a 12-year-old girl and repeatedly rapes her. Atop a wooden sideboard were more framed photos, including one of Mr. Epstein with Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. So this book, Lolita, green first edition, Lolita, his plane was nicknamed the Lolita Express, not by Epstein, but by the people who knew him. They knew! They knew what was in the book. They knew what this man was all about. This was an open secret. That's why I've known about it for 20 years. How can some pleb in Canada have been following this story for 2 decades, and somehow the official explanation is nobody knew? Nobody knew what this guy was up to? These are all innocent victims, all of these people who visited him. In the massage room were paintings of naked women, a large silver ball and chain, shelves stocked with lots of lubricant, according to photos reviewed by the Times. And Mr. Epstein regularly directed teenage girls, some recruited from middle schools in Queens, to massage him while he was naked. Now, we've seen in a previous video I did of that Ehud Barak showed up at Epstein's apartment, and then 4 young girls show up at that apartment as well and leave. Might have just been leaving, but they were there while Barack was there. During a hotly contested election campaign, he had time to go visit the sicko. Now, in the collection of letters, it's insane to me. Birthday messages from Zuckerman, Mr. Allen, Mr. Barack. There were letters from Noam Chomsky, Joshi Ito, an entrepreneur who would later resign from MIT and the board of the New York Times because of his ties to Mr. Epstein, Lawrence Cross, Martin Nowak. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And this idea that Trump thinks that this should just go away. Why should this go away? And we know the answer. Because it threatens to overturn a table at which Trump is sitting and eating. If Epstein truly was Mossad, if Epstein truly was CIA, and it seems irrevocable that that's what he was, operating some kind of honeypot to what? Bent to what will? To make sure that leaders around the world and business leaders did the will of Mossad or the Israeli government. I mean, you can't say firmly because nobody wants to investigate. The reason they don't want to investigate is because he's the hub and all the spokes. We could figure out a lot. And just yesterday, Trump issued a statement saying that any state that was caught boycotting Israel would not be able to receive disaster funding. It was so tone deaf, and MAGA was so outraged that he had to rescind it hours after it was released. But isn't that crazy? The federal government and the state government forcibly extracts taxation from you at the barrel of a gun. Guns are what back up the law. Guns are what back up the IRS. Guns are what back up government. They're basically the legal mafia. They've got control, they create the laws, and they enforce it judiciously, and judicial power is backed up by firearms. So they take your money, and then they tell you, the sitting president of your country tells you that if you don't support a foreign nation in their war efforts and in all of their efforts, after he's deployed the full strength of American military might in the so-called defense of Israel in their currently offensive wars. I don't know how anybody could see it any other way. I think it started out, you could have a good justification for calling their actions defensive or preventative offense to check Hamas or to check Hezbollah in Lebanon or to check Iran or to check forces in Syria that were being unleashed. But the fact is, as time has gone by, this is a war of aggression. This is about expanding Israeli territory. This is about performing the definition of an ethnic cleansing is the sweeping of the land free of a people and moving them somewhere else. So moving the entire population of Gaza into a concentration camp in Rafah so that Israel and the United States can develop the Gaza Strip, what else do you call it? Now, you can say, and you would be correct, that Middle Eastern politics, specifically with Israel and the Arab states, is a Gordian knot, that conflict is inevitable. The thing that I object to is that a lot of people are pretending that the IDF is entirely noble and incapable of human rights abuses, and that everything that we ever hear about like Israel is good and the Palestinian peoples in their entirety are irrevocably evil. You know, you see the footage of how the Israelis are doling out aid. The Israelis only engage in giving aid in a very geographically isolated locations. The Palestinian people are herded like dogs. And the crowd control is live fire over their heads. And in the morning, there's bodies everywhere from people who've been shot by the IDF. I mean, this stuff is happening. It's real. Anybody who denies it is just a homer. They're not telling the truth. What's happening in Gaza should horrify everybody. It's planning that, as I'm reading Kershaw's book, very slowly, mind you, Ian Kershaw, it's just the latest in the history of Nazi Germany, and the book is into 1941, late 1941 into 42, as the plans for how to relocate the populations of Eastern Europe and what to do about all the mouths that couldn't be fed because the war wasn't going good. It's all starting to gather steam. And you can kind of see the seeds of the current situation vis-a-vis Gaza in this book. Methods pioneered by people who were trying to absolutely wipe out the Jewish race. And the same kind of methodology, which has been applied by many people, the Turks against the Armenians, and the Stalin with the, I might get the phraseology wrong, but the Holodomor, which is the forced relocation of Ukrainians, which resulted in the death of 12 million, the policies of Mao. These are all very familiar things, but they're being applied in real time right now, and the entire world is turning a blind eye. Calling them all Hamas, every single Palestinian citizen is Hamas. Ignoring the plight of Christians, ignoring the plight of Christians in Syria. Because right now, Jelani, and this is interesting too, so Canada, we're going to stop funding, that's a totally different subject, federal government to stop funding hotel rooms for asylum seekers. Maybe we'll get into that another day. Canadian forces airdrop humanitarian aid into Gaza for the first time. So what I want to focus on here, I don't want to get into this. Where are those planes taking off from? Where are those Canadian planes coming from? They're not coming from Canada. We're a world away, and we, I believe anyway, lack the ability to refuel our propeller-driven planes in the sky. And the answer is they're coming from Jordan. And you might ask, since the Canadian military is incapable of a full deployment, we couldn't even defend ourselves if we wanted to. We have a denuded military, more concerned with rainbow brigades and everything else. What are we doing in Jordan? The Canadian military is in Jordan under an agreement that goes back 60 years. But the primary mission, or one of the primary missions, is to fight Daesh, if I'm getting that pronunciation right. Now, what is Daesh? Daesh? It's a precursor. It's like Al-Qaeda. It's like ISIS. All of these things kind of just blend together and morph over time. Now, that's why our people are there. But who is running Syria right now? ISIS. Spent all these years fighting them, untold loss of life and destruction of economic activity, only to hand them an entire nation to do their will with. And eventually, they'll get their plug pulled too. I believe the Israelis, there's only so much time for Jelani. The Israelis didn't allow Jelani to take over Syria and his people to take over Syria without first bombing out of existence all of the hardware that the Syrian regime of Assad had developed for its own military. So Jelani's deliberately being kept weak, while at the same time he's being embraced, or at least visually embraced, by Israel in the West. Now, there is someone else who was embraced by the West once upon a time. His name was Gaddafi. Maybe I'll begin tomorrow's video with a little clip of Gaddafi before we get into that, because a lot of the people that he was speaking to are dead and gone now, removed by the machinations of the West and their ally Israel in the Middle East. Is the whole reason that Donald Trump is covering up the Epstein thing? Is it because he's guilty? I don't know. How involved is he with Epstein? It seems they had a long-term relationship. Doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is a pedophile. Like the online left community seems to have, they've convicted him already. We don't know. But I think it's far more likely the reason that there's a cover-up ongoing of this and other matters is because it implicates all the people pictured on Epstein's desk. It could bring down the entire world of global elites. And honestly, it should. Trump was elected to drain the swamp, and what is more swampy than a bunch of people paying to screw children?